Okay, so today we're really diving deep into the world of Tesla. You've sent over some fascinating stuff on them, going way beyond just the usual headlines.
Mm.
It seems like you're really interested in what makes them different, not just as a car company, but as this whole force and tech energy. Like you said, how we even think about cars as being shaped by them. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. Tesla's got this way of capturing our imagination almost to the point where they're like synonymous with electric cars now.
Totally.
But their story goes way deeper than just sleek designs and, all the buzz about autopilot.
Mm.
There's a lot to unpack to really understand their unique approach.
Yeah, for sure. It's more than just Elon Musk's tweets, right?
Exactly.
Speaking of which, one thing that surprised me going through your notes was I didn't realize he wasn't actually one of the original founders.
Yeah. Ugh. That's a really common misconception. Tesla was actually founded by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning back in 2003.
Okay, wow, so way back.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is their initial vision. They weren't just setting out to build, like a quote-unquote green car.
Right.
They wanted to prove that electric cars could be high-performance, desirable, even. Think about it. This is back when most electric car options were seen as pretty dull and impractical. Not exactly exciting.
Not sexy cars.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
They were trying to change that perception.
So that's got to be why they launched with the sports car, right? The Roadster, I mean, that seems like a pretty bold move to make a statement right out the gate. What was the strategy there?
It was absolutely a deliberate move. They weren't aiming for mass market appeal straight away. They wanted to challenge the perception head on. The Roadster, with its impressive range and acceleration, it just shattered that stereotype of electric cars being, sluggish or boring.
For sure. I remember back then, even reading those early articles you shared, range anxiety was a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely.
And even though the Roadster had impressive range for its time, over 200 miles, Tesla was already thinking about how to solve that problem long term. But then with the Model S, they kind of shifted gears, didn't they? It wasn't just about making a statement anymore. It was taking on the luxury market, and people loved it. What do you think made the Model S such a game changer in that world?
Well, the Model S wasn't just a good electric car. It was a genuinely great car, period. It competed head-to-head with those gas-powered luxury cars. On performance-style range, it really proved that an electric car could be all those things. Luxurious practical, not just a novelty.
And they kept going with the Model X, which definitely turned heads with those falcon wing doors. I mean, come on.
Yeah, those were pretty cool.
But if we're talking about a real strategic shift, it's got to be the Model 3, right?
Absolutely. The Model 3 was a deliberate move to target that mass market. This is where Tesla's mission of really accelerating sustainable transportation, that's where it really comes into focus. They weren't content with just catering to the wealthy anymore. They wanted to make electric vehicles accessible to everyone.
And to do that, they couldn't just build a great car, right? They needed a whole ecosystem to support it. I'm thinking about the supercharger network, for example. I mean, gas stations are everywhere, so that had to be a huge hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, you've hit on a really crucial element of their strategy. Tesla recognized very early on that for electric vehicles to become mainstream, they had to tackle that charging problem head on. And their answer was to create this supercharger network. These fast charging stations strategically placed along highways. They took a vertically integrated approach, which means they controlled as much of the process as possible.
Okay, let's break down this vertically integrated thing for a second. That's one of those business terms that gets thrown around a lot. What does that actually mean for Tesla? And more importantly, for someone who's actually driving a Tesla?
Right. Good point. In the simplest terms, it means instead of relying on separate companies for different parts and processes, Tesla tries to keep as much as possible in-house. So they design and manufacture their own batteries, develop their own software, and even control that charging network. It gives them really tight control over their product and the ability to adapt and make changes really quickly.
So it's like they're playing 4D chess while everyone else is stuck with checkers?
Kind of. It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy. But so far, it's been central to their success.
They're not afraid of a gamble, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating how much of Tesla's story is tied up in these bigger questions about the future of technology sustainability, even just our relationship with cars in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They become this lightning rod for conversations about all of these things. And people have such strong opinions about Tesla and what they represent, both good and bad.
Yeah. It seems like whether they succeed or even fail, it's going to have ripple effects way beyond just the car industry.
Oh, for sure. They're pushing the boundaries in so many areas at once. Automotive energy technology. Their whole journey is a case study in disruption and innovation. And that impact, it's going to be felt for years to come, regardless of what happens.
Looking at the stuff you gave me, it seems like with the Model 3, affordability and practicality were key.
Yeah.
They were moving beyond those early adopters, the ones who were willing to pay a premium just to have the newest tech.
Yeah, totally. With the Model 3, it was about reaching a broader audience.
Right.
They were targeting what most people actually need in a car for everyday driving. Things like a 300-mile range at a price tag that wouldn't break the bank. This made electric car ownership a reality for a lot of people who thought it was totally out of reach before.
It's pretty incredible how they managed to make that leap in affordability and range. Was it just like a tech breakthrough, or were there other things going on behind the scenes?
It was a bunch of things coming together. They definitely made big strides in battery tech, but they also got really smart about their manufacturing process, leveraging those economies of scale.
Right. We touched on those gigafactories earlier. Those seem to be a pretty big deal.
Huge. Those are key to this whole thing. They're designed for massive production, which helps drive those costs way down.
So it's not just about making cars in those gigafactories, is it? It's about controlling the whole process.
It's exactly. They're a prime example of Tesla's vertical integration strategy. By producing their own batteries in these huge factories, they don't have to rely on other companies as much, which gives them more control over cost, quality, you name it.
It's like they're building their own little empire of electric car manufacturing. But it's not just about the hardware, right? Tesla's software, especially that autopilot system, that's generated a lot of buzz.
Good and bad.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Their approach to self-driving tech is definitely one of their most ambitious and controversial moves. What they're doing is pretty different from a lot of their competitors.
How so? Well, they're not waiting around to achieve, perfect full self-driving before they release anything. They've taken this iterative approach with autopilot, which basically means they're constantly rolling out updates, improving the system as they go based on data collected from millions of miles, driven by actual Tesla owners.
So it's like this massive real-world experiment with their customers as the test drivers.
That's a good way to put it. And it's this whole data-driven approach that makes them stand out from the crowd. They're gathering insane amounts of info on how people actually drive in all sorts of conditions.
Yeah.
And then they use that data to teach their self-driving algorithms how to get better.
It's a pretty bold strategy, but it's not without its risks, right? I mean, there have been accidents and concerns about whether autopilot is really safe and reliable.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely important to acknowledge those concerns. While Tesla's approach is really innovative, it's also inherently unpredictable. They're pushing the limits of what's possible. And that comes with a certain amount of risk.
It's like they're walking this tightrope between groundbreaking innovation and serious responsibility.
Exactly. They're trying to completely change how we think about transportation. But the stakes are incredibly high.
No kidding. So we've got this potential future with more electric cars, cleaner energy, but also maybe less control in the hands of everyday people. What about their other big bet? Self-driving. Let's say they figure out how to make it totally safe. What happens if Tesla actually pulls off full autonomy? What does that world look like? That's the billion-dollar question, right? It's easy to get caught up in all the tech and the excitement, but we got to think bigger picture here. So what happens if what Tesla's doing, if that just becomes the industry standard?
It's a fascinating thing to think about. I mean, on the one hand, their success could mean a really fast shift to sustainable energy and transportation. Imagine a world where pretty much everyone's driving electric, powered by this massive network of superchargers fueled by renewable energy coming from Tesla batteries. It's a future a lot of people would love to see.
Yeah, for sure. Cleaner air, less dependence on fossil fuels. It sounds pretty utopian.
Right. But there's another side to this, too.
Oh. How so?
Well, think about it. That much success for Tesla, it could put a ton of power and influence in the hands of just one company.
I see what you mean.
If they're controlling the tech, the infrastructure, all that data, it really raises questions about competition, What about consumer choice? Even stuff like data privacy. All of that comes into play.
That's a really good point. Honestly, I didn't see that discussed much at all in the stuff you sent over. It's almost like everyone's so focused on whether Tesla can actually pull it off. We haven't really stopped to think about what happens if they do.
It's like the double-edged sword of disruptive technology, right? We're kind of programmed to celebrate when those norms get broken down. But we don't always think about the potential consequences, good and bad.
It's a tough one. So we've got this potential future with more electric cars, cleaner energy, but maybe also less control for the average person. What about their other big gamble? Self-driving. Let's just say for a second they overcome the safety issues and everything. What happens if Tesla actually delivers on that promise of full autonomy?
Man, that's another one with huge implications. Just on a practical level, it would completely change transportation as we know it. Fewer accidents, smoother traffic.
Yeah.
Imagine how much more accessible driving would become for people who can't drive themselves right now. It's a pretty big deal.
I mean, it sounds amazing from that perspective, but would it really be that simple?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's never that simple. Full autonomy opens up all these ethical questions, societal questions. How do you program a self-driving car to make moral choices in an accident where there's no good outcome? What happens to all the people who make a living driving when those jobs disappear? We have to think about all of that.
It's like we open this door to these amazing technological leaps, but then suddenly we're staring at all these moral and social dilemmas that we haven't even begun to figure out how to deal with.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Tesla so fascinating. They're not just a car company anymore. They're like this mirror reflecting our hopes and anxieties about the future. Their successes and their failures. They force us to face these really big questions head on, whether we're ready to or not.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. But I think that's the whole point of these deep dives, isn't it? To go beyond just the surface level, to really dig into the complexities of these topics.
100%. It's about understanding the nuances, the potential consequences, the whole picture. It's not always easy or straightforward, but it's important.
And Tesla is anything but straightforward. They're pushing the limits of what we thought was possible, challenging our assumptions about transportation, and really sparking conversations that go way beyond just the automotive world.
Absolutely. And I think no matter what ends up happening with Tesla, they've already made their mark on the world. They've shown us what could be. And they've made it impossible to ignore the impact of the things we create. That's a pretty powerful legacy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, it's been amazing unpacking all of this with you today. Really fascinating stuff.
The pleasure was all mine. These conversations are always a blast.
And a huge thank you to you, our listeners, for bringing us these incredible sources, for being a part of this deep dive. Keep those questions coming. And keep your eyes on the road, because with companies like Tesla leading the charge, the future is going to be anything but boring.